So today we have started with a few shots of my life, how I enjoy solitude, how I deal with problems, how I deal with my own thoughts. The secret is to take your time. See, there is something strange that happens to people, and I don't think we talk about it enough. You can spend years building a life. Nothing dramatic happened. You don't lose everything. You don't necessarily fail. You may actually be doing better than you have ever done. Your career is going well. You have got the relationships. You've got the house. You've got the money. You've got friends. Still, if I can just get there, I'll be finally happy. And then you get there and nothing. Or not nothing, but not what you expected. You look at your life and think, why don't I want this anymore? I worked hard for this. I've given my life, my breath for this. I've put in efforts for this. I've prayed for this. And that's where things can become very confusing because your life looks good. So you start questioning yourself. Maybe I am ungrateful. Maybe I am lazy. Maybe I have lost my ambition. Maybe something is wrong with me. And you start trying to fix yourself. You push harder. You set another goal. You try to create your own loophole. Your life starts looping. You buy something, you take a holiday, you change jobs, you tell yourself, I just need to get my motivation back. But sometimes that's not the problem. Sometimes the problem is that the thing you are trying to get back to isn't where you are supposed to be going anymore. And I think that's a very different conversation. Think about this. You spend 10 years becoming a very successful business entrepreneur or fempreneur. You finally become successful. And suddenly, you don't care about success in the same way. You spent years wanting a particular career. You finally get it. And now you want your time back. You spent years building a huge social circle, and suddenly you would rather sit alone with one person you actually trust. You spend years trying to impress people, and now you don't really care what they think. And here is the strange part. You may actually feel guilty about it because other people are looking at your life thinking you've got everything. And you're sitting there thinking, I know, so why doesn't it feel like it? What is this emptiness? What is truly missing? That's the question. And that's where I think we need to slow down. Because there is a difference between losing interest in your life and losing interest in the life you used to want. Those are not necessarily the same thing. Perhaps they are two entirely perspectives. Psychology has actually started taking this question extremely seriously. For a long time, we talked about persistence as though persistence was always the answer. Keep going. Don't quit. Push through. Stay committed. And obviously, sometimes that's exactly what you need to do. But in 2024, there was a review. In Nature Reviews Psychology, looked at something that doesn't get nearly as much attention: goal disengagement. In simple terms, sometimes people need to reduce their effort towards a goal. Sometimes they need to abandon it. Sometimes they need to switch goals. The review explains that disengagement can sometimes be beneficial, depending on things like whether a goal is still attainable or desirable. Now, that doesn't mean quit everything. It doesn't mean follow your feelings. And it certainly doesn't mean every difficult period is some beautiful spiritual transformation. No. The point is much more simpler. Sometimes continuing is not the intelligent thing to do. Sometimes the intelligent thing is to ask whether the goal still deserves you. Let me give you a very ordinary example. Imagine you have spent 10 years climbing a particular ladder. Every promotion gave you something: more money, more status, more responsibility, more recognition. So you keep climbing. And then one day, you're sitting in your office chair and you realize, I don't actually want the next rung. You don't necessarily hate your job. You just don't want to spend another 10 years climbing. Now, what do you do? Most people immediately assume they have a motivation problem, but perhaps you have an information problem. Your lack of desire is telling you something. The question is whether you are listening, or rather, you are willing to listen or not. And this happens outside of careers too. You can outgrow your relationships, your friendships. You can outgrow your city, your locality, your neighborhood. You can outgrow your own ambition. You can even outgrow the personality you built to survive an earlier version of your life. And that's probably one of the most uncomfortable forms of change, because other people remember you differently. They saw you differently. The emotional resonance with you was different. You responded differently, you answered differently, you approached them differently. They remember the ambitious version. They remember the social version. They remember the polite version, the successful version. The person who always wanted more. So when you start changing, they may not understand it. And sometimes neither do you. You might suddenly want to be alone. Not because you hate people, not because you're angry. You just don't feel like talking. You don't want another party. You don't want another meaningful conversation, or rather meaningless conversation. You don't want to speak. You want silence. You don't want to explain yourself. Perhaps I will give you my example. I lived a very successful life, and I'm still, in social terms, quite a successful human. But I like to stay alone. I like to think. I like to answer my own questions. I like to be on my own journey. I like to torture myself in some sense. and see how I respond and learn more about myself. You might start wondering what's wrong with me when you are going through this phase. But maybe the better question is, what am I hearing in the silence that I could not hear before? That's a very different question. And that's probably more important. Now, I want to make an important distinction here because this is where conversations like this can become dangerous if we are careless. Losing interest in things you normally enjoy can be part of depression. Depression can involve persistent low mood and loss of interest or pleasure, along with other symptoms and difficulty function. The World Health Organization notes that a depressive episode involves symptoms lasting for at least 2 weeks. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you, you are not depressed. You are just evolving. I don't know that. And neither does anyone on YouTube who has never met you declare. That's not my job. Sometimes you need to talk to a professional. Sometimes you need support. Sometimes something genuinely needs treatment. But there is another possibility that doesn't get talked enough, in my opinion. Sometimes your life is changing and you haven't learned how to recognize that yet. This is where I find older ideas about human life very fascinating because modern life has given us a very strange idea of adulthood. We are supposed to grow up, choose a career, make money, build a relationship, buy a home, buy a car, have children, accumulate more, and somehow remain the same person throughout the entire process. But some ancient Indian traditions imagined human life differently. There is an idea called Ashrama system. Broadly, it describes 4 modes of stages of life. Brahmacharya, which is the student life. Grihastha, the household life. Vanprastha, gradual withdrawal from worldly intensity. And that can be misdiagnosed. And finally, sannyasa, renunciation. Every human go through this. Now, the historical development of the ashrama system is more complicated than this simple 4-stage model. But the basic idea gives us something very interesting to think about. Perhaps a human being isn't supposed to want the same things forever. Broadly, there can be a time of learning, a time for building, a time for responsibility, and a time when your relationship with the world begins to change. You begin to loosen your grip. You begin asking different questions. You begin caring about different things. And maybe that's the one thing of the things we have forgotten. We have become very good at building lives. We are not nearly as good at recognizing when the life we have built has finished teaching us. And life itself is a teaching, it's a journey. What it was supposed to teach us, it will. And everyone will experience it differently because every life is different. And that can create a very strange experience because the old life isn't necessarily bad. It may have been exactly what you needed. It may have protected you. It may have given you relationships. It may have given you security. It may have given you confidence. It may have given you success. It may have given you everything you once prayed for. But something can be right for you at one point in your life and wrong for you at the later stage of life. That's not hypocrisy. Once I read something on social feed that life gives you teaching, and not necessarily every bad experience is trying to torture you. It might trying to teach you something. So it's not hypocrisy, that's just you being a human. And there is a beautiful idea that captures something about this for me. I came across these words recently. I don't want you to be mine. I want you to be free and still choose to stay with me. And I think that idea goes far beyond relationships. Maybe because that's also what a healthy relationship with your own life looks like. You don't have to possess the person you used to be. You don't have to remain loyal to an ambition simply because you once worked so hard to achieve it. You don't have to keep living inside an identity just because other people recognize you by it. You can let yourself become free from the person you had to be and discover who you actually want to become. And maybe that's what a new chapter begins with. Not with knowing exactly where you're going, but by becoming free enough to find out. This is where things become even more interesting, because if human beings really do move through different chapters in life, then we should be able to ask a much bigger question. Are these changes completely random, or have human beings been trying to map them for thousands of years? Because long before psychology had any words for it, like identity transition, goals, disengagement, or narrative reconstruction, I believe that's what it's called. People were already trying to understand why a human being changes, why desire changes, why attachment changes, and why there is a period of life when what once mattered suddenly doesn't. And there are some very old maps that attempt to explain exactly that. Not as a prediction, not as this will happen to you kind of ideology, but as a way of asking or understanding what kind of chapter might a human being be living through. That's where we are going next. Because I think the interesting question is, can astrology predict my future? I think the much more interesting question is, what if there are ancient maps of human life that we have never learned how to read. I'm Ruthrayan, and this is only the beginning. See you at the sunrise.